This episode of Discuss Metal was recorded on June 18th, 2022. Surviving as a metal fan during Satanic Panic.
This doesn't have, you're saying, well, Mike, this doesn't have anything to do with heavy metal.
The word is derived from pocket monsters.
Yeah.
What's evil about that?
It does.
This is the Discuss Metal Podcast, hosted by Dan Terry, Mike Tygo, and Joseph Wren. Presented by discussmetal.com.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Discuss Metal Live. It's kind of like what we do on discography discussion, except not. It's other things that we do. And joined tonight, as always, is Joe. Joe, how you doing tonight, my friend?
What is up, metalheads?
Or Satan heads, or panic heads.
Is that
right?
what we're talking about tonight? The Satan heads?
I'll get to that, but before I get to that, I need to see how Mike's doing. Mike, how are you? I see Mike like every day, so I need to get that like up to the minute sort of update in.
Oh, I'm happier than a pig in shit, Dan. Just kind of hanging out, living life. I'm on the right side of the grave, just chilling. Pretty excited about tonight's topic. I really hope that we have, Tipper Gore tuning in for this. Just
wow, we're going old school.
Yeah, PMRC. Everybody, come on down. Joe Lieberman, come on in. Just come on down. We'll have a chat. It'll be a good time. We'll have a fun, old-fashioned Satanic Panic time.
Oh, it sounds like such a great time to have. Except it wasn't, right? So, our whole shtick with this is I told Joe, and I think I even told the listeners on one of the discography discussion episodes, I was like, we're going to talk about Satanic Panic. Now, I don't know if you heard that. Joe might have cut it out or whatever. I don't go back and listen to the podcast a lot of the time, but
spend too much time making podcasts. He doesn't have time to listen to them.
I listen to them sometimes, but I usually only listen to them back if somebody's like, I cannot believe what you said about XYZ thing, person, topic, album, song, riff. And then I'm like, oh my God, we did that like a year ago. What did I say? And then I go back and I'm like, oh yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. I don't know what came over me, but
man, your opinion on bolt thrower was some bullshit. You need to. That's fucking bullshit.
Yeah, get a lot of those. Those are usually my favorites. But yeah, man. What I wanted to get into, this all came about. You guys are probably no strangers to the fact that I really like true crime, right? Like I listen to true crime podcasts all the time.
It's the truth.
Yeah. I mean, I love true crime stuff. Like, people come over to my desk when I'm at work and they're like, hey man, how was your, what are you up to? What do you think is going on tonight? Or what do you think's going on today? And I'm like, oh, it's great. But then I got to take off my like giant oversized headphones. And like, I'm like having a very pleasant conversation about my wife and kids and how everything's going. But if you can hear what's coming out of my headphones, it's like, and then the guy didn't know what to do with the dead body. So he chopped it up into about 75 to 80 different pieces. And, then he ended up eating the flesh. Did you guys know that human flesh tastes slightly like sweetened beef? And just going on and on. And then apparently you can actually use the blood to power multiple devices.
Is this like a pig destroyer situation? Like Mr. Spell comes out, Jennifer playfully wrestled her friend to the ground in front of the snow cone stand. Is that what we're talking about here? Or is this just some straight true crime? You won't believe what this motherfucker did with the body.
Well, I do like your sort of vanilla true crime, nobody's seen grandma in 8 weeks, and it's possible the grandson's the one that killed her. I mean, I do enjoy like sort of those whodunits.
Like unsolved mysteries.
Yeah. Get Robert Stack up there.
Why don't I have that music queued up?
Right. But, because then we'll get copyright struck and taken down by, somebody that probably doesn't even know Robert Stack. Man. No, he's dead. He's not going to, well, he may, I don't know. If anybody was going to come back, it would be Robert Stack. But that's like the vanilla bare bones true crime. My favorite stuff is like cults, right? Like, I could do an entire podcast on the Jonestown massacre and all of that. But one of my other favorite subjects is sort of more like recent, like culty true crime. And so it didn't take me that long to become a little bit more familiar with the Satanic Panic, because one of the first things that Joe sort of brought up when I gave him this topic is like, yeah, but Dan, I mean, we basically were out of that, right? Like we weren't necessarily like, victims of the Satanic Panic, right?
We were victims of the outcome of Satanic Panic because we had to deal with the 90s and the older generation still having that stranger danger idea in their head. And I know we had DARE in school, and those are great programs, don't get me wrong. And then we had other things happen that the Satanic Panic was blamed for. I mean, can I just say there was Columbine and subsequent events, and that's still blaming the Satanic Panic, not talking about the people and the actual mental problems that they had. Nope, it's the music. It's the Slayer. It's the Black Sabbath. That's whose fault it is.
Marilyn Manson.
We're all stars now, man.
Well, I mean, I think that I guess I'm just going to ignore what he said about DARE. DARE was not a good program and did more to introduce children to the concept of illegal drugs than prevent them from using them. They're like, okay, so wait, what are the effects of this now? Okay. And then they're like, hey, man, actually sounds pretty cool. But I think that what we felt with, like, collectively, like Joe and myself, I don't know about you, Mike, but I'm going to give you the floor to talk about your experiences as well. We definitely sort of dealt with the effects of it and how, guys, the Satanic Panic has not like completely gone away. Like, if I told you right now that there is an uncomfortable amount of people that believe that, the world is actually run by an underground cabal of satanic cannibals, like, there's a word for that, and you guys know what that word is. So, it's QAnon or QAnon or whatever it is.
Bat shit.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And like, we know like that it's crazy now, but like, if you go back to like the 1980s, when we don't have the internet, we don't have public forums, we don't have a lot of different news sources. Like, you do have different news sources, but like, things were different back then because most everybody got their news from, the evening television or their favorite talk show host or whatever it may be. And so, it's kind of like really looking into that and seeing like how all of this was perpetuated on such a large scale. Now, this is not going to be a retelling of the Satanic Panic because there's plenty of other podcasts out there that have done that. And we're a music podcast, so we're going to try to focus more on the musical side of it.
Metal.
And the metal side of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Real metal shit.
Thank you, sir.
That's the only one you get.
You got to pay if you want more. But, there's something else that we have going on after this show, once we're done having our conversation. If you guys are a Patreon supporter of Discography Discussion, we're going to be doing our monthly Patreon hangout right after we're done doing this. So if you want to talk about, that stuff, if you guys definitely need to sign up for that Patreon, and we'd sort of keep this train rolling. And the other thing too is, you might want to jump onto Discord if you guys want to talk further. If you go to discord.discussmetal.com, I think it's rolling across the bottom of the screen as we talk. So if you guys want to jump into the Discord, feel free to do so. And if you're a Patreon subscriber, we will see you after the show. But I mean, let's go, boys. Let's get into our controversial clickbaity title.
There is no waiting when your show is hosted by Discuss Metal Dan. There'll be links in the show notes. There'll be notes in the show notes, but we're talking about this topic now.
Change the channel and I'll break your fingers.
This ties into the life history, and I'm going to say life story that Dan personally lived. And that's Christian music is good, but I want to find the Christian metal that's really good. Wait, all the metal is good? Well, sometimes all the metal is good. Well, you shouldn't be listening to that. The content is bad. It's going to lead you down a bad path. Yeah, but isn't it just music? This is part of that story, right? At least for you. I didn't have the same experience. I was always listening to everything because everything was music. At the end of the day, that's what it was. So I take from this topic more of the side effects that everybody around me was living through. What do you mean you can't watch that movie because it's bad for you? It's just a movie. So where does this come in? Where are we starting off? What impact are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about more because like that's the little stuff, right? Like no matter whether you've the society as a whole has just come down from a panic, a moral panic, so to speak. What it really is, like, that's the sort of stuff your parents are going to tell you no matter what, because they're worried about you, and it's weird when you come home, and you're like, man, I just heard this great song. It's called Meat Hook Sodomy. Like it's gonna raise a few eyebrows, and it's gonna make people sort of a little bit wary of what you're into. Is this person crazy? Why would they like this sort of thing?
Easy listening.
But with Satanic Panic, it's interesting. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what the panic was without going into every single facet of it. But essentially, there was a woman who, her name was Michelle, and she and her psychiatrist cooked up. Sat down and researched for hours and wrote a book about repressed memories. And this book was kind of a banger in the sense that, all of her repressed memories were, apparently it turns out I did not live a normal life growing up, but I was in fact in a satanic cult, that my family and a whole bunch of people that were like, really like pillars of our community were also part of the cult. And we sacrificed children, and we sacrificed children, adults. We drank blood on altars. They locked me up in a cage. They made me eat poop, like all of this crazy stuff. And it's like, wow, you didn't even know about this stuff. You didn't even know that this happened. You repressed all of these memories. So like at first, as people start reading the book, they're like, oh my God, like there's a underground cabal of satanic cannibals out there, right? Like, that are gonna like, then they're coming after our children of all people. What do? They're coming after the kids.
Not the children.
They're coming to take me away. Haha. They're coming to take me away.
What?
Okay. So not the children, huh?
Got it. Because that was the message, right? Not the children. We were the children. Well, yeah, we really were the children. They're still technically the children. I'm going by birth dates, not age dates.
Okay. Well, to keep the narrative going a little bit here, the people read this book, and of course, local congregations in Midwest America under the Reagan administration are going to be like, oh my God, I knew it. Right? Like almost immediately. Like, I can't believe, I heard a story about a guy that was typing up his church's newsletter, and he had reported on, or he had mentioned something about this in his newsletter, and then like a whole bunch of other church newsletters started publishing it as if it was fact or if it was a real thing. And that book years later was discounted, as being like completely fabricated and being completely false. But
I thought you meant it went in the bargain bin.
Well, I'm sure you could probably find it in a bargain bin somewhere now. It's actually a good read. I actually have read it, but it is absolutely just a very, very creative thing. It's like the Amityville Horror, right? Like how that was sort of just like cooked up as a scary true story. But what it actually ended up turning into was all of these churches became aware of it, and they sort of had a grassroots movement. And they sort of secularized the term. Instead of calling it like satanic ritual abuse, they called it like ritual abuse. They just dropped the Satan off of it or whatever. But what was happening is you'd have a small town, and somebody would report a crime against a child, and then they would all start sort of showing up and being like, oh, okay. So the investigator would go out there, and they'd ask the kids ridiculous questions like, did this person touch you? The kid says no. And then they go, okay, when did this person touch you? And they're like, no, nobody did. And then they're like, right, but we know this person touched you. And they're like, oh, okay, he did. You know what I mean? Like getting, like asking a lot of leading questions. But because they had this rhetoric of, well, was it, was there any, anything weird? Did they make you drink any blood, or did they make you, asking children leading questions? And, the way kids are, and not even just kids, like if you go back and look at some of the interviews that they did with the West Memphis 3, it was sort of the same thing. Like they just would put words in their mouth and use them as testimony. But this was rampant. And I do want to preface this before we get into sort of the music side of it, that I also understand that like the Satanic Panic in its purest form was like no joke. Like people's lives got ruined. Like dudes would just be at work, cops would show up, grab them, tell them, yeah, you'll never see your kids again because some random kid from across town pointed your picture out in a lineup and said that you're the leader of a satanic cabal or something, and it sounds ridiculous, but like these people are being detained and they're being taken to court over it.
Mike, I'm officially accusing you of witchcraft.
I mean, you wouldn't be wrong, but that is what it is, right?
And to prove you're a witch, we are going to light you on fire. Because if you're a witch, you'll survive.
I mean, as big as I am, I'd probably burn for 3 weeks. So hell yeah, dude. Yeah, that was what a mess that was, huh? I mean, people just getting their lives ruined over nothing, and all because it's just way easier to scapegoat and place blame than be a parent and actually be involved in what your kids are into, right? Just actually monitoring and assessing what's right for your child individually, not just casting that blanket of just bullshit over everybody.
Right. I mean, and I think it's ironic because I think I can hear my kids screaming in the background because they don't want to go to bed. I promise that's the only reason. But
are you sure you're not a warlock?
I mean, I might be a warlock. I mean, I do hang out with Mike, and he's kind of the grand witch doctor of the entire community.
Ooh,
it's like we're joking.
Ooh,
We're joking about it, but like these people were basically being locked up with no evidence. And a lot of the time when it did end up going to court, hopefully, cooler heads prevailed and people are like, yeah, but there's no evidence. They said this guy killed 5 people. We don't have 5 people missing, et cetera, right? But, it was really crazy. But one of the aspects of it, that what we really want to kind of hone in on here is that sort of idea that like, a few years before that in the 70s, they started listening to Led Zeppelin songs backwards. And they're like, hey, you hear that? He's saying "My Sweet Satan" over and over again. You're running for "My Sweet Satan," and they would call that backmasking. And they're like, "This is how the devil's putting his messages in the music. He's doing it through backmasking."
Question: are the children listening to the records backwards or forwards?
It doesn't matter. It's a subliminal message.
Oh, so I subliminally hear everything backwards now?
Yes.
They literally claimed that even though you could only hear it backwards, that somehow, like you listening to it forwards, that seed of the evil one will be planted in your kids' minds, and that leads to them injecting up to 4 marijuanas a day. And next thing you know, they're a leftist and they're starting their own commune. Right?
I've been editing the podcast wrong for years.
That's
Reverse
saying,
is where
man.
it's at.
That's what I'm saying. If you listen to every episode of Discography Discussion backwards, you will find out about all the witchcraft. Trust me. Go do it right now.
Start with the Zayo episodes.
Yeah, now that those people are gone, we can have a better conversation. But I think that like the biggest thing that sort of drew me to it is this is sort of where I kind of come onto the scene, right? So like I'm not listening, I'm not going to lie to you guys and say, oh yeah, when I was listening to Bolt Thrower in the mid 90s, some people gave me trouble about that. Sure, like by the time I was in school, the satanic panic and ritual satanic abuse or whatever, that stuff was all more or less disproven. There's only still just like a few like religious whack jobs that still sort of subscribe to that, but in mainstream circles, it's not accepted as an actual investigation tactic or anything of that nature.
I mean, I know they made up the book, but there's still got to be some truth in it, right? No, it was made up. We can all move on from any suspicion that this is actually real. Yeah, but there's got to be something to it, right? That's the mindset in the 90s, at least from my perspective.
I'm not going to get into how religious people tend to cling to a single book for everything, but that's a whole different discussion for a different night. But what I will say is that it was discounted. But see, I grew up in a very conservative, very extreme sort of religion where we were not allowed to watch television, we were not allowed to listen to rock music, we were not allowed to do a lot of the fun things that you could do in the 90s. And so that's sort of where it began. So like I grew up hearing, before I'd ever even heard the music, I grew up hearing that, this type of music has hidden satanic messages in it, and that the devil is going to reach out to you through that music. And it doesn't even necessarily matter what the lyrics are. It just matters because even if the lyrics seem okay, there's probably hidden backmasked satanic messages behind it. So like, to be honest, I was like legitimately like as a kid, scared of rock music. I was scared of heavy music, and I didn't really know what to make out of it. I didn't even have like the child rebellion of like, well, I'm going to go get this stuff because like, how do I get this stuff? Right? Like my family's super religious. I don't have any money. I'm not going to go to a record store and pick this stuff up or whatever. So it's like, it's like, oh yeah, you guys hear that Ozzy Osbourne song in the song, he's like, get the gun, shoot. And I think
that's not what he said.
I think that overall, people were thinking more along the lines of like, well, if heavy metal isn't evil, then why does it have all of these really extreme, other kinds of music don't talk about this kind of stuff, even though I can make an argument that it absolutely does. But they're like, yeah, people don't talk about, like, regular people that just want to make music don't talk about dismemberment and death and murder and Satan and this and this and this. But the reality is that music reflects society. Music reflects the world that we live in. And so if you're a metal band coming up in the 80s and 90s, what's on the news? What's on TV? Death, war, pestilence, drugs, Oh, yeah. And also you've got all the people that are like, yeah, and apparently every daycare in the U.S. has been infiltrated by satanic cults. So, like, why on earth would you not assume that, or why would you be surprised that that's what people are singing about?
Last time I checked, nobody was writing metal songs about what the kids did in daycare. Maybe Me First and the Gimme Gimmes did a cover song about it. Maybe Weird Al made a comment in passing, but it just seems absurd that you would tie those two things together. But people did. Someone did, and someone else repeated it, and it became a real non-existent problem. This is also a time pre-internet, as we know it today, where anyone who didn't know about an idea, it tore apart their entire world to be confronted with this idea. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there are people that listen to Judas Priest. Have you heard of this band? Well, no, I've never heard of this band. What are they all about? Well, they're a heavy metal band. There's also this band called Stryper, and they're a heavy metal band. Yeah, but I thought they sang about all the positive things. Yeah, but they're a metal band. This information was not present to the majority of the public, not just music fans. But music was easy to blame in general because, at least I think, the popular metal of the 80s was about what? Cars, girls, go fast, drink, get stoned.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Thank you. Not so different from the 60s, except the production values were different. But this is what people were getting, was this message of the horrible people that you've only heard about in fairy tale books. They're real, and they've invaded your society. Well, maybe we all should just accept people with different ideas. That wasn't the mindset, not generally. And I think that's where a lot of the concern comes from, because there was this idea that people moved away from big cities to get away from ideals that made them uncomfortable. And now they've been living outside, and now those ideas are coming back in because now the internet is popping up. MTV is running that video again. Metallica wrote a song about a 2x4, and so now I have to worry about my kid taking a piece of wood and smacking someone in the head with it. That's not at all what anyone said about Metallica at the time. It was all about how they cut their hair. But that's where I see it. It's like it was leftover negativity. Everyone was looking for something negative, and they wanted to complain about heavy metal because it was easy.
I think it's more nefarious than that, honestly. So, to me, and again, this is my opinion. Take that with a grain of salt. But it stands to reason that, like, during the 80s, the early 90s, stuff like that, there was, especially at the during the Reagan administration and even into like HW administration, there was a rampant amount of over policing happening and a ton of people being incarcerated, right? And so there's this whole drugs are bad, you go straight to prison, right? Well, despite enacting all of these policies, which they had touted as keeping people safe and making rule of law and all that shit, there's still rampant amounts of like people protesting, rioting. There's all sorts of like civil unrest happening. There's people like being murdered still. There's all this horrible stuff happening. So the powers that be, honestly, like, rather than have to do the big boy job of legislating and actually figure out what's going on, it's easier to scapegoat, man. Like, when your policies are failing, whenever you're selling people a bill of goods that, like, oh, if we just get these drug dealers off the street, now it's all going to be, sunshine and rainbows. But that doesn't happen when there's still race riots. There's still like all sorts of horrible stuff happening out there, over policing. It's way easier to say, well, yeah, there's obviously some sort of evil satanic element out there that's causing all this mayhem, that's causing your kids to rebel and to sin, because that's a hand wave, right? That's a hand wave. It's way easier to do that than to legislate, and it's a huge cop out. And people's lives were legitimately ruined for it, despite the fact that we have a freedom of expression, you know what I mean, and freedom of speech enshrined in our law. Yeah, despite all of that, like these people are just flagrantly flying in the face of that and trying to legislate that away, and spending all this time and money, all these resources on a scapegoat instead of on social programs and policies that would actually address the economic and or mental crises that are causing these issues. So yeah, it's just way easier to hand wave that away. And yeah, and it's going to be interesting to kind of talk to you, especially Joe, because I think Dan and I have very similar backgrounds, being from like a deeply conservative Christian in like rural America that just absolutely feared and abhorred anything outside of what like their determined safe standards were. And folks who are from small town America will know exactly what I'm talking about. That bled over way beyond the 80s and 90s into all sorts of media, not just metal music, but I mean, from strictly a metal music standpoint, you were not doing yourself any favors in those small towns being known as a metal fan. At the very least, you get made fun of for being a weirdo, you know what I mean? But at the worst, you know, even your friends in your church communities would just not want to hang out with you, or they would just talk down to you constantly at church or make you some sort of pariah. It was just the strangest thing. And that continued. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's still going on to some extent.
Yeah, it's totally still going on. And I think the fact that like when the times that we grew up, we may have been past the people being incarcerated for being Satanists side of it. But I do think that like we still feel the effects of it. Yeah. Even to this day, there's still the fire and brimstone preaching and, you know, all of that stuff that's going on in middle America, you know, right now, right this second, right while we are talking, there's somebody talking about this from the other perspective. Right. And I think that it's interesting how afraid people can be of things that are different. But the irony that I found is that I don't know why they're surprised that these things exist, that extreme forms of entertainment exist, you know, because again, they do sort of reflect the world that we live in. And I had to fight that so much as a kid, because like, it wasn't the fact that I was listening to bad music. It was the fact that I was listening to popular music. And if it was popular music, because I mean, you know, guys, I hate to break it to you guys, but you know, metal is not like as underground as you think it is. Like there are like plenty of people out there in the world that listen to metal, and whether it be, you know, classic metal, all the way up to the, you know, whatever those guys in Norway were doing. You know, like there's so much nuance to it, but at the same time, like a lot of these guys that wrote these angry lyrics, they were frustrated about a lot of what Mike was talking about, you know, people being incarcerated for the public good, you know, in large numbers, because those people were different, or maybe they had different ideals. But you know, whenever you're looking at like sort of, I'll say modern day, you know, when I grew up, you know, even once I had gotten past the hurdle of, okay, my parents don't go to this crazy church anymore, right? And when I grew up, I actually didn't even know that there was like a big panic, like a big moral panic or anything going on. I just thought it was like that church that we went to. You know, I thought it was like isolated just to that. So imagine my surprise whenever I'm in high school and I'm starting to check out like all these like Christian bands and stuff. You know, because like we still go to church, but we went to like a less extreme church, a church that's not going to like talk about repressed memories and satanic influence over heavy metal. But then, you know, at the same time, I'm getting all my CDs together because I'm about to go to a week of youth camp, and then they go through all the CDs and they're all like, "Yeah, I don't know about this. What is going on? And this band is called Embodiment." Like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, it's like a Christian death metal band. Well, now, Dan, you know, Christians don't worship death, and you know, the devil sometimes appears as an angel of light. Just because you think that this is Christian, and I was like, I mean, and you know, at that time, you know, what I wanted to say is what I would have said now is like, I kind of really don't care. I'm really just listening to it for the sweet jams. You know, like I'm listening to
the core tenet of your faith is the murder of your figurehead. Of course, you worship death. What are you talking about?
Right, 100%. You know, and you know. Oh, what is this? I never could just explain away the embodiment cover, but I got really, really good at. I did get really good at sort of explaining these things to like youth group leaders and stuff. And it's weird because like they let everybody. The big thing that was popular whenever I was growing up was Christian pop punk and
oh
ska.
yeah, dude, 100%. Five Iron Frenzy was not the only one.
Slick Shoes, Goatee Hook, take your pick.
Yeah, man, they were all over Five Iron Frenzy, one of the best.
You
And,
can't
like,
handle this.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that like that stuff was all sort of allowed. And like you'd think that you had this like super progressive, this super progressive youth pastor because like he wears like the little necklace that's made out of like pure white rocks. You know, he like wears that around and, walks around in sandals everywhere and
Shells
whips out
on the neck, shells on the wrist.
Yeah, he whips out his acoustic. Yeah, he whips out his acoustic guitar all the time, and like if you're lucky, you hang out long enough, he might play "Bad Day" by Fuel or something, or something like. You'd be like, "See, I'm hip. Like I listen to some secular music, and I do this." But as soon as I show up with a copy of "Liberate Dex and Ferris" by Zao, they're like, you know what that means, right? It's saying save yourself from hell, but only Christ can save us from hell, Daniel. Like. And it's weird how a switch would get flipped in the brain where it's like, wait a minute, this is all that loud, screamy, satanic stuff. And the reason they think that is sort of a boil over, from that period in the 80s and 90s where anything that was associated with like death, darkness, or just like the not the pleasant sides of life. Immediately, it's like, yeah, that stuff has demonic influence. And the way these guys' vocals sound, this could only be done through the presence of demons, in them. And at the same time, like they're saying all this stuff, and I'm still kind of an impressionable kid, and I'm listening to Zao, and I'm like, I mean, maybe they're right. Like maybe like I never actually have heard anybody sing like this before. Like maybe maybe there's something to it. Like you go through like a little bit of that doubt, that self doubt of like, well. Maybe it's all true and maybe they're just worried about it. And like, I'm not out to defend these people necessarily, but I do want to say this, that a lot of the stupid stuff that people have said over the years about my music interest and things that I'm into, really, I think, at least in their mind, it was coming from a place of genuine concern. And at the same time, too, you also have people that we just recorded an episode on a band that's the entire point of the band is to piss off Christians, right? And so like you have that sort of like extreme stuff. So it's like I'm standing in a record store trying to convince my mom to let me buy the new Norma Jean album, right? And she's like, no, I mean, I just don't think that's going to be a good choice. And I'm like, Mom, this kind of music is not satanic. Like nobody does this anymore. Like this is a Christian band, but like right behind it is like a copy of Deicide's Once Upon the Cross. And you're like, God, come on. Like I can't even catch a break here. And then like your parents are still watching the news, right? And then they hear reports of, a extreme metal band, in Norway. Members of that band have been linked to several church burnings and murders. And you sort of had all that stuff that was going on in Norway during the panic in the early 90s. And you're like, I don't know, man, like maybe it is true. And so like it's stuff like that can be a little bit frustrating to have to wade through, because like if we look at it through the lens of retrospect, we're like, okay, well, I can tell you the entire story of what happened, in Norway and specifically why those things were happening. And, if you want to understand what those guys' mindsets were, go back and listen to our elitism and gatekeeping chat, because that's all that was a bunch of guys trying to out metal each other and try to be more true and try to be more cult and all that. But the thing that sort of I come back around to is that most of the things that are attributed to being, satanic or being from the perspective of Satan and trying to attack our children and trying to destroy society as we know it, most of the time, like it's literally just misinterpreted motivation.
100%. And I used to think it was a combination of distortion and harsh vocals, but since guitarists have had harsh distortion since the 60s, the 70s, different definition of harsh, but it really did come down to what the vocalist sounded like when we were growing up, and everybody was still criticizing the metal for what it sounded like instead of what the actual content was. I'll never forget the day somebody said to Dan, you really should, listen to it. And I'm sure you'll find that the message really is evil. And without missing a beat, he said, I have listened to it for years. I have a better idea. You should listen to it. And while you're at it, read the lyrics as much as I have, and maybe you'll have a different opinion. And it came down to, the dude's just growling at the microphone. Well, Napalm Death had been doing that for years. So because this band decided to have a different message, they were still bad because, people don't really get angry when they have positivity in their heart. They don't make angry sounds like that. Yes, people do have emotions, and when they create art, they do it the way that makes sense to them at the time. I've never met an abstract painter who screamed at the canvas before they threw a bucket of paint at it. But I'm sure that person exists. And you know what? I want to see it live.
I think kind of circling back to what I said a little bit earlier, I think one of the core tenets of why metal music especially was demonized so hard, especially like not just during like the Satanic Panic, but like all through the 90s, early 2000s and such. If you actually look at most metal bands and their message, they are extremely like anti-violence, anti-war, question authority, like anti-fascist type stuff, right? So they're basically, if you look back throughout history, let's say even through like theatrical or literary history otherwise, right? Absurdist literature, absurdist theater, or satirical theater and satirical literature has existed to do nothing but formulate a scathing review of the ruling powers or ruling class at the time. And a lot of those folks were executed for it or just flogged or other things, right? So the reality is you can't tell me that something like, thrash or Cannibal Corpse, anything like that has just grotesque lyrics, right? That force people to confront the realities of what's actually happening out there, right? That's not like ruffling a few feathers, and that's not being like a satirical or absurdist take on what's currently happening. That's damaging to a lot of folks in power. I mean, there's just no easy way around that. That's exactly what was going on at the time. And so it's really important to, powers that be to control the narrative and not let people start thinking, hey, it is kind of shitty that people like, get blown apart in war and all this other shit happens, right? I mean, if you want the best example of this being true, look at what happened to support for the Vietnam War once all the televised images started coming back to the American people. It cratered overnight. The minute they started providing coverage of the war and unfiltered coverage, support just cratered overnight. And so when people are given the chance to think about, reflect upon, or even be confronted by the reality of the world in which we live by these satirical or just over the top, artists, it's really hard to build and control a narrative and maintain a status quo when that's the case. And this was also the same time of the rise of the moral majority under Falwell and that kind of stuff too. So you had the invasion of evangelical Christianity into the political sphere. You had the things were being demonized for music wise, things like that. And so I think a heavy part of that reason was because of the fact that it was a satirical force that was openly encouraging people, especially kids, to confront the reality which they were living.
Yeah, and that was sort of in a best case scenario, right? Like that if the band, because I mean, obviously we know that like some of these artists absolutely were doing it just for the fact that like, oh, right now everybody's afraid of Satanism right now. So if we talk about Satan like a whole bunch, we're going to actually get like really, really popular via word of mouth. Like people are going to check us out. That's how you get your deicides,
People always dick ride, dude. That's throughout history, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole thing is that the problem is like guys like that end up doing more damage to the people that are doing it for more, I don't know, genuine reasons, that's not to say I'm not trying to say that deicide is, I don't know. I'm not trying to say anything bad about that band.
They're easy to scapegoat. Scapegoat.
Yeah, if we ever do an episode on that band, I'll have plenty of things to say about them in that episode. But I do think that like it talking about, being at the record store and you seeing these records in the background and stuff, your mom's just going to be like, yeah, but this one's got pentagrams all over it, or this one's got this over it. And I don't know, son, I read in a news article the other day that, and I was like, okay, fine. I won't buy the record, but let's leave. I'm late for my D&D session with my friends. Wait, you're what? yeah, I'm gonna play Dungeons and Dragons with the boys later. No, you're not. No. Because see, mom just read a pamphlet saying that these are some signs that you need to look out for. Is your child Is your child listening to satanic rock music? Is your child playing Dungeons and Dragons? Is your child a vegetarian? That was actually a real legit thing from a Panic era like public service announcement. It's like, oh, if they're vegan, they're definitely and the vegan connection's funny because like I know a lot of the guys that were like anti-fascist in the 90s were also vegans, you know, Napalm Death being a primary example. And so yeah, like those guys. Yeah, those guys are vegans, but they're also like anti-fascist. But as we all know, anti-fascist is just a front organization for whatever. You know what I mean? Like whatever political ideology that you don't agree with. That's what it means.
Insert straw man here, right?
Yeah. Just throw them up there, right? But I do think that like overall, you're right. Like a lot of these, and I know this part of it is a little bit more conspiracy theory because it's obviously not like very publicized, but the idea that like these guys are just saying things that are going to upset the general order of things. If a band writes a song called F the Police, you know, then it's like, oh no, this is going to cause civil unrest. The most amount of people that hear this, they're going to rise up against the police force and overthrow them. And let's be completely honest, they're going to upset a whole bunch of middle class folks, and those are the folks that we cater to, the suburban middle class. So like it makes more sense that these sort of ideals are being targeted more at like suburban life, and I think that's also why like you know they targeted sort of daycares were one of the biggest target because daycares. And I never made this connection until this week. I was reading like a lot of stuff about Panic and all of that.
This is an exclusive
the reason
right here.
Yeah, the reason they were attacking daycares was because why did daycares exist in the 80s?
Because mom and dad got to go to work.
You had working parents.
Because mom started working.
That's true.
Right, and if mom starts working, then that means that the family unit has been broken up, and the most sacred thing to the conservative world is the family unit. We don't want to break up the nuclear family, right? And you know, that's, oh my God, that's terrible. So then it's like in-home daycare. Oh, well, do you know what they're doing to the kids at those daycares? You know, like it sort of starts off subtly. And I don't necessarily think that was like the reason why we had like the Panic in general. I think even back in the 60s and 70s when heavy metal was first starting to become a genre, yeah, obviously people just didn't like how it sounded, so they found any way to like demonize it, you know. And the bands played along with it because they're like, yeah, well, we don't want you to listen to it anyway.
You're not the audience.
Yeah, like we're basically reaching out to people that are like, yeah, man, I jive with that. You know, like a little bit of a carryover from the hippies, you know. Yeah, and jazz too.
Jazz.
Well,
see also jazz, right? Or anything swing or early rock and roll. Yeah, all the above, right?
Any music that exposes the tritone is evil.
Yeah, man. You get that galloping triplet going, and it's just that's the devil's downbeat right there, baby.
Well, a lot of that music wasn't made by white people.
Yeah,
starting out, right? And so like I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole tonight, but that's something that I think played a big role into it as well. But you know, this constant demonization of things that are different. We definitely live in a more progressive, diverse world now. And there's obviously like a lot of growing pains with that. And I'm not trying to have a political discussion here. But obviously like people are far more accepting overall. People are always offended by like, you know, what is, you know, I can't believe this person said this about this group of people. I can't believe this person said that. But so that's also where like, if you can use Satan or heavy metal or video games as the bag, Mike said this perfectly earlier, you know, like if you can say that, like, if you don't want to say, I don't like this particular group of people, I can just take a type of music and say that's the bad guy.
Yeah. And it just, dude, right there.
It just so happens that that group of people includes, or that genre of music includes a lot of people from a group of people you don't like, right? Yep. You know, and we always joke that's the reason why a lot of suburbanites don't like rap music. I just think they can't relate to it. But I think that the crux of it too in Christianity, I think that's people always have like, why do you care so much about Christian music? And I think part of this is why. Because it stands out to me as one of the biggest anomalies and one of the things that you would not be able to predict to come out of all of this, right? Like, where did all these guys that are listening to heavy music, like how were they not so systematically shut down by their peers, like by better Christians and all of that. And the answer is they absolutely just had to go through a lot harder of a road than just like any band that's starting out, right? Like you had bands. What was that? It was the band Horde. It wasn't even a real band, but it was just one guy sat down and recorded a raw black metal album, in the style of true Norwegian black metal. And the record label starts getting death threats from people, and it's the kind of thing that like the Satanists all hate you and want you to die, right? For doing this, because what you've done is you've basically like infiltrated their camp, right? Or you've got in on the ground floor on something that you should have never been allowed. We got to get better security out here in the black metal scene, right? And but then these guys also like they're making this music like in private because your pastor comes in and he's not going to be like, oh well, people are like, oh well, you can't really lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. This is live. They're like, your pastor can't come in and you're like, yeah, well, I'm making this raw on black metal album, so it'll reach out to people that are fans of black metal. And I won't get into how like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Anybody that's like a hardcore black metal fan,
it's all bad if it's not your favorite band in that genre.
Yes, that's basically what it comes
part
down
of the
to.
deal. We accept you for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So would you guys mind if I kind of just did like a quick, like just shared quickly my life experience with this? Because this when Dan when you first brought this up, that hit home hard. Because that dug up a lot of other stuff from being a kid. I was just like, whoa, I forgot all about that.
Mike's like, all my issues are coming back. You've inspired me.
I had my therapist just like dialing, oh my God. But no, so a lot of you out there that grew up in rural America are going to just, have just, war flashbacks here. But essentially, I grew up in a really weird time. So it was, the internet was a thing, like an actual thing you could really utilize. I was about probably 13 or 14 years old, and so before that, everything that you would be involved with or have any sort of like knowledge of came from firsthand sources of people who were involved in that, or communities that you hung out in, or groups you hung out in, or you'd go to the library and get some books on a subject, right? So you had to do a lot of research on your own or word of mouth, things like that, and you relied heavily upon communities in which you were involved. So being from a very conservative and very religious family and being essentially raised in this very conservative, very religious evangelical church, the holdover from the satanic panic around heavy metal was it never went away. A lot of the parishioners in this church were in their 80s when I was a kid, and they had gone through all this hoopla, and so essentially my parents essentially relied on whatever like a pastor or elder of the church would tell them about certain things, even if these people had no idea what they were talking about, like no idea whatsoever. And so, rock music in general was just demonized. Heavy metal was out of the question entirely. Everybody was just satanic, but it bled over into other things in my life beyond that. So one of the silliest examples of that is I got like just really way too into Pokemon as a kid. And I'll never forget my mom heard from, I think, some at the time, like some pastor or I think it was even a chat room. It may have been that later on in my childhood, that it was some sort of Eastern mysticism. And so without doing any research, without watching the show, without researching anything about that, or even just asked me, hey, what's this all about? Could you explain this to me? It was just over and done. I think she like took all my Pokemon cards and burned them. And it was just like,
oh my God.
Wow,
it was so insane because, and again, like this doesn't have, you're saying, well, Mike, this doesn't have anything to do with heavy metal.
The word is derived from pocket monsters.
Yeah.
What's evil about that?
It does have everything to do with heavy metal because that mindset in these small like Christian communities in rural America and in evangelical churches just was this self-perpetuating machine of just like ignorance and like not even wanting to be involved in what your kids were a part of. You just took someone else's word for it. And so, yeah, the music equation, I had to fight just tooth and nail to get Christian music in my, and I'm not even talking like Christian metal. I'm talking like Insiders and Five Iron Frenzy and like Supertones, like really innocuous, like very overtly Christian bands. And even that was like scowled upon, right? And so I had to fight for this. And throughout my entire life. I mean, I played in a band. We were around doing tours and playing shows for 10 years. And that entire time, I think my dad came to a show, like one show, one time. And then after that, it was like, why are you involved in all this satanic bullshit? Like the whole time. And never once was the subject broached of like, what are you guys singing about? Like, why are you guys choosing this particular rhythm or key? Because again, the holdover from that just prepackaged dismissal of something you don't understand from the 80s and 90s, it bled over into every aspect of life in rural America. Truly, it did. And if you were a kid in a church involved in this stuff, I mean, I cannot recall the number of times that my youth pastor, if I started questioning something, would like chastise me and say like, like it's really ungodly for you to question my authority. Like God has anointed me to lead like, this congregation, and like, you're supposed to submit to like the leadership because I was appointed by God. The number of times that was said, and looking back on it now, it's like makes your jaw drop. But at the time, like, you are forced to grow up in this community that gaslights you to thinking that they're doing the very best thing for you, while at the same time making you feel like a total piece of shit because they don't want to actually deal with or address or even investigate something that they don't understand. It's just this. It happened in the 80s. Oh yeah, we talked about that back then. It's all part of X, Y, and Z, and just it's bad, right? So it was a really unusual thing to grow up in a situation like that. High school was a little bit better because by then, new metal had happened. I think, but the number of Jinkos and like all that other shit out there were like enough that I probably snuck by a little bit there. I got a little bit of a free pass, but it was very much not a normal thing. I had a great group of friends, and I was generally well liked by everybody at school, but like we didn't hang out outside of school because the interest pool for those types of things were just like maybe 1% or less of the student body. And so it's a weird thing. I mean, if this is like New York City, if I was raised in New York or anywhere else like that, I wouldn't have this experience at all because I'd have so many different cultures and backgrounds and stuff around me all the time. I could easily find some niche to get into and just like, and express myself and have a good time. Right. But in the community I was in, that didn't exist. And so this weird combination of growing up feeling like, from the time you're a little kid, like, well, I'm going to go to hell because I like listening to fucking Turbo Lover by Judas Priest, or it's baffling. But the people who are like trying to like just condemn this at a 50,000 foot view because they're trying to save your soul or to use some sort of good are doing irreparable harm to people. And a lot of this stuff I didn't even realize I'd carried with me into adulthood until some sort of life event happens. I'm just like, oh shit, I guess I didn't get out of childhood unscathed. It's like, so I got to tell you guys, I mean, I hope somebody listening tonight or listening in general to this just resonates with that, because it is to someone that wasn't involved in that or someone from like a bigger city, it's going to sound like the most like cult, just wacky shit you've ever heard in your entire life. But like, if you're from a place like me or a place like Dan, like it was the most normal thing. And you were just like, you were the asshole perpetually growing up. It was you, because you had some sort of unusual interest or like unorthodox thing you were involved in. And it was just baffling and a hard thing to deal with, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, you're giving me flashbacks over here. Because it was exactly like that. Like just trying to get anything past. I tried to buy a Third Eye Blind tape one time. And this probably would have been, I don't know, I don't remember the exact year, but
I remember this story.
Yeah, and it was like and don't get me wrong, like my parents, to their credit, did read the lyrics instead of just deciding that because I had a tape that they were just going to throw it away. Like every now and again, they would have a moment where I'm like, hold on, this might actually be okay. Like I might get past this, right?
You're lucky.
And,
really?
Yeah.
I wish that would have happened.
That didn't happen all the time. Because I mean, 4 years before that, they threw all my Ninja Turtle toys away because Ninja Turtles were going to cause me to become violent and aggressive and all of that stuff. You know what I mean? So I live like no explanation given other than like, no, you can't watch Power Rangers because the Power Rangers use crystals to power their Megazord, and that's witchcraft, and there's it's not in my house, and all of that. And so like,
was it crystals? I thought it was the Morphin Grid.
That is the morphine grid, but they don't know anything about it. That's the entire point. They don't know anything about it.
Who's this giant head on the wall who tells these children what to do?
Right. Well, I mean, no. Well, but Zordon is considered an interdimensional wizard. Oh God, wizard. We don't have to talk about what happened when Harry Potter became mainstream.
Is this a bad time to point out that all the parents that had a issue with metal and Pokemon and insert whatever wizardry and witchcraft thing probably went to see Star Wars and liked it?
That's different. That's science fiction. It's all technology.
Well, you're forgetting, Joe, like Harry Potter, that's mysticism. That's witchcraft. That is of Satan. And you cannot be involved in that wizard and demon world, right? So you better get your ass back to your room and read about the demons and the wizards and J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, because God be praised, they were some Christian men. But the demons and wizards in Harry Potter, that's a step too far.
Totally different. Yeah, it's all secular, right? Like, it's so funny because I had to actually explain to somebody the other day what the word secular meant, because they're like, I don't think I've ever really heard that terminology used. I was like, it was one of the most used words in my childhood growing up ever. I mean, like, hey, you don't have a bunch of secular music in that CD case, do you? I mean, what? Yeah, I mean, yeah, Metallica, that's secular. Okay, mortification, that's okay, flip it. Yeah, it's like mortification, that's okay, flip it. Okay, POD, that's okay, flip it. Limp Bizkit, nope, that's out. That's secular. Korn, that's secular. Linkin Park, oh, I don't know, man. Isn't that the one where isn't that the song where they just yell "shut up" to your parents? And I was, well, I think it was just "shut up" to everybody, not specifically your parents. But and just sort of having to fight those battles, and like that's the little stuff, right? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been at a Christian event and had something that I owned that I paid for ripped out of my hands and thrown away, like because it was evil, like from a authority figure, like the youth leader that was in charge of that, or whatever. And can't even get into, I mean, I've told this story on the podcast a few times about how, like, I had friends at school that would dub me tapes of secular music, and
check my mixtape, man.
Yeah, you can write on the tape whatever you want, right? So you put like gospel hymns, volume 4 for like Slayer, Seasons of the Abyss, right? Or eventually they find out and they throw the tape away, right? Because they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that Satan is influencing my household as I go. And it really was like, it's funny now.
Didn't I overdub a Dolly Parton tape one time for you?
Maybe. I mean, but it was always like, hide it. That's why I got so into headphones. They ask why heavy metal fans especially are so obsessed with wearing headphones all the time. And a lot, at least for me personally, it was because if nobody else could hear it, nobody was going to say something to me about it. It's like always, I'm still to this day a little defensive and a little bit high strung because I'm waiting for somebody to come challenge what I'm doing.
Tired of being hassled.
Yeah, just trying to
like, put it on a boombox in your room, and no matter how low you turn it, somebody from the next room's like, turn that fucking shit off. That's just, you know what I mean? You're tired of being hassled about it. You know what I mean? It's just the worst.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's like, and like, especially your parents, if there's anything they hated more than heavy riffs and growled vocals, it's rapping, right? So like trying to navigate through the whole new metal thing.
For different reasons, though. Different reasons.
Totally. Maybe.
It's a style of music that historically, diction is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. So you can really understand what he's saying, and he's saying it fast, and he's delivering it rhythmically. So it's bad,
you're
right?
Overthinking that, Joe. You're overthinking that. There's a way easier reason why my parents didn't like that.
There's a way easier. Yeah, a way easier.
I'm trying to save you both.
Trying to save us from getting demonetized, right? Yeah. So like there is sort of that scary moment where you're like, because I remember like somebody tapped me like, what are you listening to? Oh yeah, just some music. Oh yeah, well what? Oh well, it's just this Slayer. What is that? Slayer. Yeah, Slayer. Yeah. No, you can't have that here. Grabs it out of my CD player, throws it in the trash. Like I've lost at least like 15 to 20 CDs like that. I mean, nobody does it to me now because I'm like grown up and I'm scary, like especially when I have a beard, But like, yeah. So right now, my CDs are fair game. You can just come. Mike's gonna come into work, one day, grab my Bluetooth speaker and be like, "This is satanic," and throw it in the trash, right? But
I mean, Eastern mysticism.
Yeah, or like I don't know if you can relate to this, Mike. How many times have you had to how many times have you had to leave an event and go change your shirt and come back? like as a teenager, like I had that. And of course my parents were just like, I didn't even know that he had a terrible shirt like that.
Dude,
So
it was I couldn't even have. It was a non-starter in my house, non-starter. So I'm going to tell you guys a story, and I swear to God that this is 100% true. This is 100% true. This is as it happened. And some of you guys out there are going to think that it is absolutely just that I'm full of shit and I'm telling tales, but I swear this is true. So owning shirts like that shit, no way. So I dared when I lived at home still to have a fucking Doomsday Machine poster for Arch Enemy on my wall in my bedroom, because that album. First of all, if you guys haven't listened to that, go fucking listen to that album, because as an audio engineer, producer myself, that is a flawless album from an audio engineering standpoint, and it also just slaps. The riffs are sick. But I had that poster on my wall. I love that album. I was listening to it, and I came home one night. I think I was either working, came home. It was probably like around 8 or 9. And my mom was sitting in her armchair, and she was like white as a sheet, and like eyes wide. And like I walked in, I was like, "You all right?" And she goes, "Did you see that it's gone?" And I said, "What?" She says, "Your poster, the one with the skull and like the thing on it, it's gone." I was like, "My Arch Enemy poster? What are you talking about?" She goes, "I walked by your room earlier, Mike, and I felt a spirit that was mocking me and mocking God. And that poster was mocking me and it was mocking God. And so I rebuked it in Jesus' name, and I tore it into pieces, and I tried to burn it, but it would not burn. And so I had to rebuke every piece in Jesus' name and burn each piece one by one, because the spirit of, whatever, insert here, was in that, and it was evil. And it was mocking us and mocking our family. Swear to God, that happened. That is like word for word what happened. So what do you mean having a Slayer t-shirt, Dan? Like,
it had nothing to do with the poster being covered in anti-flammable materials.
No, it was Satan was protecting the poster.
Joe,
Satan personally insures all of your heavy metal posters.
Joe, have you never walked home and just saw a painting or poster on your wall and thought that's mocking me and mocking God? Like, if you have, what's wrong with you?
I've never had that thought.
You could
process.
reach that conclusion walking down the street. Oh yeah,
remember, Joe didn't grow up like us. Okay, only we are sensitive. Only we are sensitive.
I'm starting to feel bad for you guys. I already felt bad for Dan.
I'm not gonna. Well, and I'm not. This is not like I'm not gonna tell a similar story to Mike's in the spirit of one upping him, because I'm not. His story's way like funnier. Dude, I almost want to respond to, like, do you feel good now, Mom? Like, do you feel cool now? Like, do you feel powerful in doing that? Because like we both know that you just crumbled that up and threw it in the trash. Like,
No. She burned it. She showed me.
Oh my God.
She burned it. She made me look at it, and I'm telling you, dude, like, what? So here's the thing. That's mental illness, dude. Like, what are you supposed to say to that? Like, what
if
kind
you
of
were really hearing voices telling you to burn things?
Yeah,
that's
how do I? And by this point, I was probably about 18 years old, still living at home, and still as a adult, I worked a full-time job. I worked a job. So here's the thing: I worked off campus full time. I worked on campus at college as a writing instructor and like an adjunct sometimes, and played in a band that traveled around the place, right? So I had all this responsibility. I paid for everything I owned. I had all my own shit, right? But still, as an adult, like, that pursued me into adulthood. To be honest with you, for the entire time that I was in that house, it was unbelievable. And it was, she wasn't like joking. Like, she was like legitimately believing that. So there's nothing you can say to that, right?
I had a very similar experience. My dad, we used to have a family computer in our basement, right? Like, it was a Gateway 2000, very similar to a computer I have behind me that's off camera, but that's actually belongs to Joe before he jumps in and says that he's just anyway. But no, so we had that computer, and like I would always throw like do you remember how Windows used to, like, it would just take whatever was in your My Pictures and it would use that as the screensaver if you walk away?
It can still do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it used to do that all the way back in the days of Windows Millennium Edition. And I remember I had downloaded, so I had just learned how to like digitize my music because, I was tired of people throwing my CDs away. So I was like, okay, this computer has a disk drive, so I can just rip all of the songs onto my computer, and I can have them there in a folder. And if I'm really worried about it, I can name that folder "Gospel Hits Volume 4." Right? If I'm really concerned
the
about it.
family.
And here's what's funny is like this was multiple years after my parents had stopped going to the Pentecostal church, and so. My parents weren't on me to the same level that they were maybe when I was like really young, but they were still sort of keeping their eyes open, looking for things. And I think it was just muscle memory, old behavior that they were repeating, because over time my parents progressively became cooler, right? But at this particular juncture, I think I was already in high school, and I had just ripped a copy of In Flames Reroute to Remain.
It's a good record.
If you guys, yeah, it is. It's a great record. But the CD got thrown away. Spoilers. But essentially what it was is it had, you know how that has like the Jester head on the cover of it? Every In Flames record had like a Jester head thing.
Sure.
So that artwork that I downloaded to go with my, I think I was using like Windows Media Player or something, or maybe it was Winamp, to display the artwork. Well, you had to go to a browser and download the art. Like programs like that didn't just find the artwork online for you and just pop it in there.
We're so spoiled today.
Yeah, so I had to download like JPEGs of all of these cover artworks, and I go, oh my god! So I come home from school, and my dad's like, sit down, and I'm like, all right. What's up, Dad? You know what I mean? I got that look on my face. You know, I'm like, what are you? I mean, come on, dude.
He said it just like that. I guarantee
the original thought that I had, the first thing that came to my mind was, oh God, did I leave my CD case in my locker like I was supposed to, or did I actually? Is it in my backpack right now? I actually can't remember. I don't actually know. And he's like, you left the computer on this morning. And I'm like, look, Dad, I'm sorry. I know the computer, you're not made of money. I know that the computer is like having another refrigerator, blah, 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 blah. Right. And he's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He goes, imagine my surprise when I was downstairs looking for something. I look over at the computer screen and see a picture of Satan staring right back at me.
The Dark One himself.
And then, of course, I was kind of a douchebag. I was still a douchebag even back then, I guess is the better way to say it.
Thank you for that amendment to your upcoming statement.
I originally, and I go, oh my God, Dad, did my brother take a picture of Satan? You know? And,
oh yeah, dude. Yeah, the lateral pass to the little brother, man. There you go.
Big brother, yeah. I was like,
he fired up the chain.
Hell yeah.
Oh my God.
Forward.
Yeah, and it was funny because I didn't even know what he was talking about. He's like, no. He goes, a picture of Satan flashed upon the screen, and a picture of hell flashed across this. Yeah,
you should have asked your dad. How do you know what Satan looks like? How do you know what he looks like, Dad?
That's an old.
What have you been doing?
That's old hat. I'd been saying that for years. But he was like, then there was a picture of hell, and then a very sexually suggestive picture, and I was like, Dad, the internet's kind of a complex place. You need to make sure, maybe you clicked on something and that's why you're seeing all these images, right? Like, oh yeah, come on, Dad. You don't trust me. This is not the first suggestive image you've seen on the internet. Come on, don't lie. But then Dad's like, he's like, look at all of these pictures. And then he pulls up the folder. It's my JPEGs folder. I knew what he was talking about. I'm not stupid, and he's like, all these pictures flight across. I was like, oh, those are just album covers. And he's like, album covers? Albums that you own? And I was like, well, I mean, I did spend the birthday money that you gave me to get it. So, I mean, technically, I guess you own it, and he was all like, look at this. And he opens up Reroute to Remain, and there's like all these pictures of just like a jester. And then there's some people, like some zombies moving, underneath it. It's like really cool. It's really cool. Liner notes.
Oh, look at that guy.
Yeah. And he's like, yeah. So the guy at the very top, that's Satan. And all of those people underneath him are us. And this and that and this and that. And then, he's like, where's this album located in my house? And, of course I have to show him, right? So like, I'm like, yeah, it's this one. Dude, like, I mean, must have been like 20 or 30 CDs and just in the garbage. And he's like, I don't want this. I don't want this in my house again. And dude, what was in there? The first Soilwork album. And like, that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy for me to get in the early 2000s. I had to import that. Like I had to pay. I had to send cash, well hidden cash, because that's how we did things back then. I had to send well hidden cash to a distributor, and then the distributor essentially he would procure a copy of the album from like Century Media over in Europe, and then he would get it mailed. It'd be mailed to me. So like it. Not only was
like doing a drug deal, really, you're doing a drug deal to get a hold of this fucking Soilwork.
Not only was that
Norwegian
CD
black metal.
That CD was $30.
I got some deathcore right here.
That's not including shipping, like at all. That's not including any of that. So, and it took like 8 weeks for it to show up. Like, I mean, it was a huge thing, and just, oh my God, Dad threw it in the trash a week later. Like, holy crap, you know? And
that was $30 in late '90s money, kids, when it was when it was a shitload of money.
I mean, this was
ordering
this was
CDs
absolutely,
used to be much more expensive for everybody.
Oh boy.
yeah. And the Columbia Record Club had figured out that we were all scamming them, you know, by that point. So like, there wasn't a whole lot that you could really do. But I remember like really being taken aback by that, because like my dad didn't like, he wasn't like, oh, I prayed over this, or I felt that I was being mocked by this, or like, you know, it wasn't like, I'm going to go burn these or anything. I mean, he did throw them all away, but it was just really strange to me, because at the time I didn't really consider my dad to be that religious anymore. And what's even more ironic about it is that like, dude, we used to clean records out. We had this with and they still have it. My parents have like at least like 100 or 200 LPs that are in a closet underneath their basement stairs. And you know what's in there? My dad's Black Sabbath albums and Led Zeppelin albums and stuff, because my dad came from a weird background, you know, and he was kind of the kind of guy that people would have considered to be a deadbeat back in the day, or at least in his words, like he said.
I don't want to listen
you know?
to this stuff anymore because it's bad for you, but you know, I spent money on it, so I'm going to keep it.
He had told me years prior to that I could listen to those records as long as my mom wasn't around. You know what I mean? So like, very, very inconsistent, right? You get like mixed messages a little bit, but yeah, it just, stuff like that absolutely blows my mind. And it's weird now that I'm adult and I'm starting to realize where like a lot of those mindsets come from, because I used to think people were just being mean for no reason. Like I actually didn't understand it. I used to be like a lot more innocent as far as like, oh my God, when somebody would mess with me, I'd be like, why are you doing this to me? You know, like I'd get like really, really upset about it. And all the sarcasm just came from being defensive. Like, an argument can be made that if I hadn't been treated that way when I was younger, that like I'd be a much nicer person now. You know, it's not all the songs about death and Satan and mutilation that made me a bad guy. You did this to me.
I learned from watching you.
Yeah, John from Brutally Speaking podcast had a good comment. He's like, and him and I are actually talking about this last week. He goes, my dad found religion and changed his whole life based on a suggested video on YouTube. So some people are susceptible to some things, to such things. Yeah, 100%. And like that is him and I were talking about that. John came to town last week. We went and hung out, and then we went and saw Atreyu and Nothing More. So shout out to that night. But what was interesting is that, you know, we still see that to this day. So like the idea of like, oh, that's in the past. It was like in the 80s and 90s, and people don't think that way now. It's like, yeah, dude, absolutely. There's an uncomfortable amount of people that actually do.
Lance had a great comment a while back that the boogeyman, like we've been talking about the whole time. Yeah, the boogeyman, it just changes, right? Heavy metal, video games, social media, take your pick. I mean, anytime anything happens, even like recently when like these horrendous tragedies happen, like people go straight for school. What were they listening to? Oh, they were involved in this or that. Like, they want to scapegoat and make a boogeyman because that's way easier to do than addressing the complex social issues that lead to this type of behavior, right? So it just all circles right back, and it takes a lot of. I mean, I'm a dad, and I never thought I'd ever be a dad, right? And I got a almost 8-month-old baby at home right now, and he's awesome. And now I'm thinking to myself, like, it's going to take a lot of hard work, not just to do the bare minimum, like provide food and shelter and stuff, but like I need to be active and a participant in like stuff that he's into, and kind of make sure that it's, you know, age appropriate, or is it like that takes a lot of work, like actually being into stuff and sitting down with your kids and having those types of sometimes awkward or hard conversations. But that's called, sorry folks, that's called that's being a parent, right? That's being a parent. Only you can make that choice for your family, right? And so, yeah, I have some outside guidance, I guess, but that's not gonna you know, make my decision for me. It takes a lot of effort to be involved in things and then kind of figure out, you know, with your kids what's best, and then kind of help them grow and mature and learn on their own. So it's just, again, what it boils down to is, and Lance hit it, it's boogeyman. It's way easier to make a scapegoat than it is to actually try to, you know, formulate an informed opinion or actually do parenting.
Right, because it's easier to say, you have to be into what I'm into because I already understand the things I'm into and I know what's good and what's bad. And then I don't have to deal with trying to understand other things that you might be into that I'm not necessarily into.
Yeah. Yeah. And, John brought up a good point too. Weird that it's not any of the contents that have been around for those years. But sure, blame it on whatever shifts the blame and responsibility off of yourself. Satan did it, a really good point too about the, this is probably the last thing I'll end up saying about the actual satanic panic itself. But there is, there was the idea of like one of the things that had first shown up on the radar of investigators in the 80s was the idea that like it wasn't like strangers that were abusing kids, but they were finding out that it was actually happening in the household and the parents, and they couldn't explain that away. And it was just so heinous that they couldn't wrap their minds around it. So they're just like, oh, it was because the parents are members of a satanic cult, right? Like it was just like just rolls off the tongue. Well, this is so evil that literally only Baphomet himself is the one that, the big guy is the only one that could be orchestrating something so horrible. And instead of wanting to face the reality. But to your guys' other point about like being a parent and sort of determining what's going on with your kids, I know a lot of people that are our age think that they're super progressive and think that they're super accepting of things that are not like, because they don't want to grow up like us. So like a lot of people that are going to be listening to this probably grew up and had the same sort of experiences that we did. But I think the thing that you have to look at is you have to sort of apply that to how things are now, that we all inevitably will become our parents. And I see it all the time, especially in social media, because that's the bad guy that I'm going to use to make this point is, I see it all the time. Like, oh, only kids in the 90s would understand. Our generation, we were the last generation of people that played video games, but also played outside. And we're the last generation that also did this. So there's like, and all I'm thinking of is that like meme that I see, which like old man yells at cloud, because I see people that are very, very progressive about social cause turn around and be all like, yeah, I like everything except country and rap. That stuff sucks. Right. Or it'll be like, I'll never let my kids listen to this. I'll never let my kids listen to rap. Or, I'll never let my kids watch TikTok because TikTok is destroying music and it's destroying, all of these things. Or when everybody was like terrified about twerking and, stuff like that. But like these are the new bad guys. These are the new boogeymen. These are the new different things that we may not necessarily understand because we're too old. You know what I mean? Like to get it, one of the biggest things is like understanding the newer generation's humor and how like they enjoy like absurdist humor. And a lot of that stuff gets brushed over by people our age and they're just like, oh, they just don't get it. Or, like, cause I've tried showing coworkers certain memes and certain videos and stuff, and they'll just watch it and be all like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's funny in kind of a basic sort of way. So like there's already like a huge gap between like our generation and the newer generation. And so, and I'm not here to preach to anybody, but maybe before you're just like, that music's evil, or that TV show's evil, or that entertainment is evil, right? Or this social cause is evil. Like you might want to compare what you're saying to things maybe that your parents have said to you as you were growing up and see where the parallels are. And it's hard because like, obviously none of us think that we're the bad guy in our own movie, right? Like we are the protagonist of what we've got going on. And so when you become a parent, your priorities shift. And that's why I tried not to hold a lot of this stuff against my parents, because I know that in their mind, they were modern, they were progressive, and they were worried about my soul, and they were worried about these things that, yeah, it turns out that a lot of it was pretty dumb and pretty unfounded, but it did come from a place of genuine concern.
Well, I'm going to take a different approach to the same lesson because it's a message for life, right? It's not a message for parenting specifically. You have to watch all the movies to know for sure which ones are bad and which ones are good, subjectively. To speak about something with any kind of authority or knowledge, you have to first spend the time listening to it, watching it, understanding it. I've been an uncle longer than either one of you have been parents. That doesn't make me an expert or understand your perspective, but you have a different problem that has nothing to do with accepting what people like as different from your tastes. You just have a different obligation to a different living creature that might make you spend more time listening to what they're listening to, watching what they're watching, and creating that positive conversation of, well, I want to know what you're into, because there's a part of you that wants them to listen when you want to show them what you like. It's not always about right or wrong or good or bad. It's, this is what I like. You like that? Let me hear it. Let me see it. I think one of the most positive stories, since Dan told that story about his dad earlier, one of the coolest stories I ever heard was, and I don't remember the band, he's going to tell me, later in life, same dad, let's put the CD in. Let's listen to it on the way home. And it was like some doom, dirge, whatever.
Yeah,
doom band.
it was Exhumed of the Earth by Paramecium, which is an incredible death doom metal album.
Totally different perspective. Like, okay. And you look at that story as an outsider and say, okay, so you got it. It's not about bad or good. It's about spending time understanding, trying to understand to the best that you can. Because even though you don't have the same likes and dislikes, I get to tie everybody's ideas together tonight, I think. It starts in the home. So if you're going to be this child's parent for their entire life, maybe you should spend the time paying attention to what they like and trying to understand it instead of making assumptions about it. And then take what you learned about that and take it into life and listen to everything, watch everything as much as you can before you start calling it evil or blaming it on Satan.
Maybe other people's interests are none of your goddamn business. Quite frankly, you know what I mean? Like, so just don't be a dick, really. Just it's not.
We're coming back to that on this podcast again. Don't be a dick.
The problem about metalheads is we are. Sometimes we do tend to force our interests on people, whether they want to hear them or not. Oh, dude, check this out. You think that's cool? You should check this out. We did a whole other discussion about that.
You know what this reminds me of? The last time we got locked in a freezer.
Right. 100%. Well, guys, I think that we have. We've beaten the Baphomet statue as much as we possibly can. There was a lot of stuff I was going to get into about black metal in Norway, but we'll save that for another one of these. But I just want to thank everybody who watched or is watching this on the rerun or listening to it on the audio version. If you guys are enjoying these Discuss Metal lives, please let us know. And let us also know, just like on the main podcast, you guys give us band suggestions. Give us suggestions for things you'd like to hear us talk about in a format like this. Obviously, we've got three guys here that have a lot to say about a lot of things, and so definitely make sure you're sending us those suggestions too. If you want to hang out with us or find us, the best place to find us on the internet is on Discord. If you go to discord.discussmetal.com, we have conversations like this. We have memes. We talk about music. We have band recommendations. And if you just found this randomly on a YouTube thing and you listened all the way through it, like to this point, make sure you check out our podcast Discography Discussion, where we pick a metal band and we listen to all their records in a week and then we talk about it. So definitely make sure you're doing that. But if you're a Patreon subscriber, stay tuned. Not to this specifically. Go to Discord. You're already on Discord. We're gonna post a link to a hangout. Where myself, Joe, and Mike will be hanging out with our Patreon subscribers. Thank you guys all so much. Joe, thank you.
Thanks,
Mike,
Dan.
Thank you.
See you guys on the next one.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
This has been the Discuss Metal Podcast, hosted by Dan Terry, Mike Tygo, and Joseph Wren.
Presented by discussmetal.com.
Easy listening.
$1 at a time.